Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me today. Have you ever thought about how they would do it? Like how they would end elections here in the United States? Well, you don't have to think anymore because more than 2 months ago, they did it. You may or may not have seen this. It was a major story in the Coral Gables Gazette. Coral Gables Commission approves November elections, resets city agenda. All seems normal, right? Until you begin reading the article. Quote, in a landmark decision, the Coral Gables City Commission voted 3-2 on May 20th to move city elections from April in odd-numbered years to November in even-numbered years, beginning in 2026, aligning them with general elections for the first time in the city's 100-year history. The vote marked a significant turning point. Not only does it abbreviate the current terms of office for Mayor Vince Lago and Commissioners Melissa Castro and Ariel Fernandez, cutting them short by 4 months, but it also signals the new majority's intent to reshape the city's political and administrative direction. This is about increasing turnout and bringing our elections in line with broader democratic participation, said Mayor Largo. Critics, however, contend that the change was politically motivated. Castro and Fernandez, who cast the dissenting votes, argued that the move benefits incumbents allied with the mayor and dilutes local control. Quote, this is not about participation, Castro said. This is about political convenience. End quote. So just so that we're all clear here, this is a story about local elected officials deciding to cancel their upcoming elections and just not have anyone vote. Yeah, we're just going to stay in power a bit longer. Also, the voters don't get to decide on this. We're just going to make it happen ourselves. Do you want to guess the political party of the mayor? The mayor is a Republican. And technically, this is a nonpartisan commission, but the mayor and Commissioner Richard Lara are both Republicans. And so this move by Republicans on the commission was so unpopular, so outrageous, that even the Florida Attorney General, which is an entirely different story, by the way, on its own, he publicly disagreed with this and threatened legal action because when it comes to a major shift like this, such as changing the city election to another year, voters should get to decide. Voters should essentially be able to either approve or deny such a move. It's a democracy, not an autocracy. But that was rejected. They said, we will not be repealing this. Despite the whining about how unconstitutional this is, we're just going to keep this in place anyway. A month later, this was the leading story in the Miami Herald. Quote, it's official, Miami cancels November election, postpones it to 2026. By this 3-2 vote, they have now not only canceled the upcoming election in the city scheduled for this November, but they've also extended their terms in power an additional year. And why would the Republican mayor of Miami want to stay in power? I don't know, maybe perhaps the corruption investigations into him and also insurmountable calls for him to resign. Last year, Mayor Francis Suarez faced calls to resign after the Miami Herald revealed that he had advocated for a no-bid city contract with a little-known software company that was in talks to partner with a private firm that was already paying him $20,000 a month. And so that arrangement raised serious conflict of interest concerns, as Suarez stood to benefit personally from the success of a deal involving his private employer, which is Redivider, in which he appeared before multiple times and also regularly maintained communication with them. And this got bad so fast that not only was the mayor under investigation by the Florida Commission of Ethics, but also the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office and also the feds. So, yeah, a lot going on for the mayor of Miami. He even had to end his campaign for the Republican presidential nomination for 2024. Subsequently, Florida Democrats began calling on him to resign. Ultimately, the state's ethics commission dismissed their investigation into him on a completely different matter. This one essentially was about whether or not he accepted expensive tickets to high-profile sporting events. And now there is a new one. A former Miami commissioner accused the mayor earlier this year of ethical misconduct in a major soccer stadium deal. Former Commissioner Ken Russell says that Suarez willfully signed a resolution in 2022 that kept out an important change that Russell voted on. The amendment would have directed $10 million from the developers of Inter Miami Soccer Stadium to new parks in the city. That change never made it into the final legislation. Since Suarez works as an attorney outside his mayoral duties, Russell has asked the bar to discipline him. The mayor told the Miami Herald that these claims are baseless, but when you look at the public record for the Republican mayor of Miami, none of this is good press. So why not just give myself another year in office and not face the voters to hold me accountable in less than 5 months? What do I always say on the show? Eyes open, heads up, stay focused, right? I mean, because looking at a story like Miami, don't just focus on what the Trump administration is doing and what's happening at the federal level, but also pay attention to what's happening in your own backyard. Who's in power in your state, in your city, in your district that has authoritarian tendencies and looking to become more and more oppressive and more powerful? The crisis has been here. People are just now finally starting to wake up. Because one day you wake up in the city of Miami, Florida, and you see a headline like this, that the elections are canceled in your city. Because yes, they really did just cancel elections. Their upcoming November elections for this year. And again, the Florida Attorney General is staunchly against this. Quote, "You should immediately cease the process of enacting the ordinance to move the date of municipal elections and change the terms of office for elected officials in the city of Miami. The citizens of Miami deserve and are entitled to the right to make this decision directly. Home to thousands of patriotic Cuban Americans who know better than most about regimes that cavalierly delay elections and prolong their terms in office, the city of Miami owes its citizens what the law requires. If you nevertheless move forward with the proposed ordinance, my office reserves the right to consider taking all available actions to prevent this violation of law from occurring." End quote. So once again, that's the Florida Attorney General saying, you can't do this. Now, Miami officials went ahead and they just did this anyway, despite this letter claiming that this was legal under Florida law. But what they failed to mention is that specifically for Miami-Dade County, there remains a home rule still on the books. And under the city of Miami's home rule charter, any change to election timing must be approved by the voters. The city of Miami is just flat out refusing to abide by that rule. One Republican mayoral candidate has already sued the city over this. We are waiting to see what further action will come out of the state attorney general's office. But this is a story that is irrevocably connected to what the Trump administration and Republicans are already doing in the states right now to change election rules, to disenfranchise voters, and ultimately end elections completely. And that is a story that no one is talking about. And again, we are broadcasting that here tonight. And we have more on that next. The Jeremiah Patterson Show is an independent news media platform. If you want to see more special reports like this, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack at tjpsnews. When you become a paid subscriber, you'll get immediate access to exclusive content, opinion pieces, the upcoming Resistance podcasts, and The More You Know, a series focused on diving deeper behind the headlines with historical context. According to one viewer who upgraded to a paid subscription, quote, "I like your deep dive style. There are many doing the quick news updates, which is helpful, but we need both." Another viewer said, "Jeremiah, you are a fantastic reporter and I truly value your work." I do this because it matters, because the investigative journalism is imperative. And most of all, I'm unabashed and unafraid to tell the truth. Upgrade now from free to paid for just $7.99 a month or $75 a year. In July of 1946, the state of Georgia was in the middle of a pretty contentious gubernatorial election, and one of the pressing issues was if black men should be able to vote. And this man here on your screen, Maceo Snipes, served in the military fighting in World War II. When he returned home, he considered for months actually if he should go vote because it was his constitutional right under the 15th Amendment, but it was still quite dangerous. Up until that point, Georgia had allowed only whites to vote in the Democratic primaries and said that black people could only vote in the general election. Though that policy was inherently racist and federal courts struck it down in early 1946. So Maceo Snipes, seeing the two candidates, one of whom was the two-term governor, Eugene Talmadge, who was in favor of enlisting the all-white primary, and the somewhat progressive James Carmichael, he made the uniform decision that he was going to go vote. Now, the KKK in this time essentially was continuing their racist tradition of intimidating black voters, making it clear that they would hunt and kill any black person that voted. But Snipes was not fazed, and on election day, he audaciously walked into his local polling place and he cast his vote. He was the only black man to vote in his entire Georgia county. It was the day after that 4 white men showed up outside his grandfather's farmhouse where Maceo and his mother were having dinner. The KKK called him outside to meet, and then they shot him in the back. Maceo Snipes was executed because he dared to practice his right to vote. He was a war veteran, and he was still, once again, viciously murdered because he practiced his right to vote. On March 7th, 1965, on what became known as Bloody Sunday, a group of mostly black civilians, including John Lewis, peacefully protested the attack on their right to vote in Selma, Alabama, after yet another black person was killed. Once they made it to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis and others saw the officers in sight from afar. He tried to reason with them, but after giving a warning for the crowd to disperse, the officers surged forward, unprovoked, to attack the crowd. They were beat with nightsticks, tear gas canisters exploded, stinging the air and blinding people in the eyes. Mounted deputies charged into the crowd, trampling people beneath horse hooves. Protesters fled, slipped, screamed. John Lewis was clubbed on the head. His skull was fractured. Blood was stained on the pavement. People cried and crawled, trying to find help, trying to find air, all because they were marching for their right to vote. It was only days after that finally the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was introduced and signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, with figures like Dr. Martin Luther King there, live to see it happen and shake his hand. Because they knew what this moment meant, how monumental it was, how long of a fight this had been for minorities, and specifically black people in this country. Because although black people and minority groups were granted the right to vote technically under the law, they were still people in this country, and institutions in this country, and elected officials who did not want them to vote. And so the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a huge deal. It was big. In 2013, in the case called Shelby County versus Holder, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Section 4B of that Voting Rights Act of 1965, which contained the formula used to identify states and localities with histories of racial discrimination in voting. This formula had required those areas to seek federal approval or pre-clearance before changing their voting laws under Section 5 of the Act. And so essentially by declaring Section 4B unconstitutional, the court effectively rendered Section 5 unenforceable, removing a critical safeguard against discriminatory voting practices. So that decision effectively opened the door for states to pass restrictive voting laws without federal oversight, and prompting a wave of legislation that disproportionately affected voters of color. In the summer of 2021, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch slipped a single paragraph concurring opinion onto a major court ruling that further eviscerated the Voting Rights Act. The question he raised was about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. He asked who has the right to sue to try to enforce that key section of the landmark law. And for decades, we have seen private individuals and groups who did not represent the federal government have filed numerous lawsuits under Section 2, that prevented states and local governments from drawing up racist voting maps to suppress minority voters. But, Justice Clarence Thomas also joins Neil Gorsuch in that sentiment about gutting the Voting Rights Act. Since 1994, he has held the belief that that section of the Voting Rights Act prohibiting practices denying Black people, Hispanics, and other minorities an equal right to vote should be removed. He said it was exacerbating racial tensions rather than easing them. And because of Gorsuch's paragraph, Thomas's views, and the conservative majority's willingness to gut the Voting Rights Act completely, we are seeing multiple different states rushing to be the first to get a case like that before the Supreme Court. In June of this year, the court was presented with the Louisiana case on creating 2 Black majority congressional districts when Louisiana is 32% Black, making Black people the second largest racial group in the state after white residents. There are 6 congressional seats in Louisiana. And so what this new redistricting map would do is dilute the Black vote. It would effectively suppress Black voters in the state of Louisiana. According to reporting from NPR, in doing this, Republicans are seeking to protect key seats for them, like Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader Steve Scalise. So the court did not rule on this. They said they needed a little bit more time to review it. Justice Thomas wasn't happy about that because he was ready completely to just gut it. He was ready to just outright gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which would have allowed this map to go into effect, and also for every other Republican state to effectively do the same thing, to have their way with this kind of racist voter suppression as well. Because understanding the Louisiana case is also understanding that this would not only stop private citizens from suing over maps like this, but it also would give states the green light to draw up voting maps that are not only not drawn fair with consideration to race, because according to him, it violates the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection. I swear, Clarence Thomas has the most bizarre, insane, draconian views. But he is a Supreme Court justice, and he wants to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Amendment. So not only did the Supreme Court not hear that Louisiana case that day, but they also said that this case specifically can be argued before the court again. And this has dangerous implications because if you recall, Citizens United was also re-argued before the court. It effectively led to corporations and labor unions gaining First Amendment rights for huge spending in elections, opening the door for wide-scale corruption. But the question on Section 2 survival may be closer than October. And this is no longer a question on if Section 2 will survive, but how long Section 2 will survive. Last week, the U.S. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against North Dakota Native American tribes in a redistricting case. The court said that private individuals do not have the right to sue under Section 2. Attorneys for the tribes told the 8th Circuit in response that they will appeal this all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, if the court hears this and rules in favor of what the 8th Circuit just said, Section 2 will be gone. And get this, these timelines are deliberate. Because with a case like North Dakota, you have October for rehearing the Louisiana case. And then you have this North Dakota case that could potentially come before the court earlier. This has significant relevance. Why? Because elections are coming up in November. Ruling on a major case like this before those elections could sway the way that those elections go. And per this super conservative majority on the Supreme Court right now, it will be in favor of Republicans. But this story goes even deeper. Because since coming back to power, the Trump administration has decided to abandon all voting rights cases completely. 4 days after Donald Trump took office, he dismantled the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. We've covered that here on this show and why that is horrific. By January 28th, the Department of Justice had voluntarily dismissed a lawsuit brought by the Biden administration targeting Virginia's voter purge program. On March 6th, they withdrew from a Texas redistricting lawsuit. On March 14th, the DOJ dropped a lawsuit against Alabama's voter purge program. They did the same thing for Arizona, Wyoming, Illinois, and Georgia. And not only did they drop these voting rights lawsuits, but they also installed anti-voting attorneys into key roles at the Justice Department. So they're effectively laying the groundwork here to have major contentions and to have legal pushback on what states are doing, to have legal pushback not in favor of voting rights, but in favor of voter fraud, contending what's happening in states, trying to get a bunch of these cases thrown out in the courts. So they are no longer focused on voting rights, but they're focused on voter fraud because that's the goal of the new Justice Department under the Trump administration, where Donald Trump believes that the 2020 election was stolen. And so that is going to be a core mission of Donald Trump 2.0, finding the fraud to prevent another stolen election. So that's what we're facing here. And, in terms of the people that they've installed in these positions, you have people like Harmeet Dillon, a person that I've talked about here on the show, who said that she is going to keep bringing these cases against the states for voter fraud, which in many cases does not exist. And remember, she leads the Civil Rights Division right now, the Civil Rights Division at DOJ. 70% of those lawyers are gone because of her arrival. Because that division, which was responsible for protecting civil rights in this country and going after hate crimes in this country and protecting the voting rights of officials and people in this country, enforcing the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that division has essentially been turned into a political weapon controlled by the White House. That's why 70% of those lawyers are gone. And also because of its erosion and reversal on voting rights restrictions. And because of that, because of the DOJ stepping back and not, taking voting rights seriously anymore, and being pro voter fraud, which is beneficial to Republican states. States like Texas now feel emboldened to draw up new redistricting maps that could effectively block Democrats from retaking the House in 2026. Because when the Department of Justice dropped several lawsuits against the states, Texas was one of them. And the Trump administration directly lobbied the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, to draw up a map that was more, quote, ruthless. This is bombshell reporting from Ari Berman at Mother Jones here. Quote, Trump's Justice Department, which has dramatically reversed all voting rights enforcement, appeared to have orchestrated to push to redraw the state's U.S. House districts. The department sent a letter to Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton on Monday, alleging that 4 of Texas's congressional districts were unconstitutional racial gerrymanders. Abbott then cited constitutional concerns as a reason to call a special redistricting session. It just so happens that all 4 of the districts singled out by the DOJ have been represented by Black or Hispanic Democrats. That raises the likelihood that Texas Republicans, in a bid to give their party more seats, will redraw their districts in a way that further reduces representation for voters of color who were already severely underrepresented in the state where their numbers are growing. Quote, the GOP strategy, while potentially blunting Democratic efforts to retake the House, is not without risk. The last time Texas Republicans redrew their districts mid-decade in 2003 under the orders of then-House Majority Leader Tom DeLay, state legislative Democrats fled the state, leading to a lengthy political battle. It's possible that can happen again. During the summer of 2021, they also decamped to Washington, D.C. in an unsuccessful bid to prevent Republicans from passing new voting restrictions. It's also possible that blue states like California or New York could retaliate by redrawing their own maps to counter the GOP. And Texas Republicans, by moving voters from safe Republican areas to target Democratic incumbents, could also endanger the re-election bids of some of their own members. Quote, if the Republicans get too terribly greedy, they could end up achieving exactly the opposite of what they're trying to achieve. End quote. So once again, when you have a story like this that's being released at Mother Jones here, this Texas Republicans have a brazen new plan to block Democrats from retaking the House in 2026. When you have a story that is published like this, and the fact that, Donald Trump lobbied the Republican governor himself, hey, yeah, you have a couple of districts in here that aren't sitting right with us, but, those districts are run specifically by Black and Hispanic members in Congress. One of those members, of course, being Democratic powerhouse Jasmine Crockett, who has been a thorn in the side of this administration for as long as can be. And with this new plan here, she would lose her seat. She would lose her power. And so when you have a story like this, the implications are large, because what they're trying to do is to block the power of Democratic elected officials to win. You can't win, redraw the map. We can then win. That's what Republicans are trying to do across the country. I mean, I'm just covering just some of this tonight. Some of this. This is what we are seeing. They're trying to redraw maps in a way that is beneficial towards them. And they're also trying to get this up before the U.S. Supreme Court so that the Voting Rights Act can be gutted completely. And of course, all of this comes as Donald Trump signed an executive order earlier this year consolidating power over the FEC, which is the Federal Election Commission. The language in the order reads that all elections must be controlled and monitored and overseen by the people's elected president. Very dictatorial sounding for someone who has expressed not only having elections canceled, but you know what? Let's not just do elections anymore. We'll have it fixed so good you don't have to worry about it. Democrats sued over this. They lost in court. So now Donald Trump is in charge of the Federal Election Commission, which was a bipartisan commission, by the way, that oversaw elections in this country. Now Donald Trump oversees elections in this country. He's over the FEC. And no one is talking about this. He is going to try to cancel the 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election. And that is not hyperbolic to say. But if not right, cancel those elections, we can expect a gutting of the Voting Rights Act and rewriting election rules in their favor. Because they are not trying to play fair here, as we continue to see headlines like this. They are not trying to play fair. They already canceled an election in Miami to stay in power. At first, we're going to delay it for a year. Then that year becomes indefinitely. Many people have talked about the resistance in terms of fighting back against this administration, and that the midterms will be that major, colossal resistance. But what's not being discussed, and it's really irritating and enraging, as a journalist that's been covering this going back to freaking April, is that this is going to sneak up on a lot of people in terms of them not being aware of this. And also the mainstream press is doing a great disservice not covering this, because this is something that is happening right now. Right now. States are rushing to be the first state before the Supreme Court that is the one that can take the cake home and say, yay, we gutted the Voting Rights Act further. So now we can just drop racist maps completely and dilute minority votes so our white officials can win. So our Republican officials can win. This is straight out of the white supremacist authoritarian playbook. Suppress the vote. Block the Democrats from retaking the House in 2026. Because we know we're unpopular with what we're doing. We can't win fair and square, so let us institute irreparable changes to the electoral system. But who's to say we're going to have elections if Donald Trump has control over the Federal Election Commission, which was, we have to say was because it's in past tense now, was a bipartisan commission of officials made up of Democrats and Republicans to protect and oversee elections in this country. Donald Trump now has that power, alongside Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, in which during her confirmation hearings could not answer a simple question on if the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden or Donald Trump. She continually said in her confirmation hearings that Joe Biden is the president. Joe Biden is the president. But I'm not going to say if he won that election or not, because that would be going against the dear leader. This is where we are. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. You can't say that you were blind if it does come to this. Share this video with your family or friends. They're going to try to steal, if not flat out cancel, elections. Share this video.